Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, an oral history podcast about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 loiners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. My mission here is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, did during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how loiners have, are, and will be coping with our multiple and expanding crises during their day-to-day working hours. Can we turn things around? We'll find out. To tell this story, I need loiners like you, dear listener. I need people in Leeds or people from Leeds to come on this podcast and just tell me what they do all day and let me record how this affects us. Thank you for listening.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I like that one. I remember going to the careers advisor at age 13 and saying I would either really like to be a massage therapist or a bricklayer. They looked at me a little funny, I have to say. They were like, what, why? I remember getting the advice from this gentleman, shall we call him? Well, massage therapy. Well, that industry's got a very seedy reputation. Perhaps you might want to think about something different. So I'd come across one of my sister-in-law's friends who was like a holistic therapist, beauty therapist person, and she'd exposed me to my first ever massage, and I was just absolutely blown away by the impact that it had had on me. And I was like, oh my goodness, I want to be able to do that. That's amazing. If it can make people feel so amazing, I want to be able to do that. And the only other thing that I had in mind is I'd done a 3-month experience at building college, and I quite liked bricklaying. So they were the only two things that I had in mind that I might possibly want to be when I grew up, you know? I didn't really have very many aspirations, largely because I grew up in a household with Victorian-esque parents that just expected me to get married and go have children and be supported by somebody else, you know? I didn't really have many aspirations when I was younger.
A lot of it is lack of, like you say, you say you've got two direct experiences there, which is why you wanted to do those things. And it's like, well, other than what your parents do, which you never really know anyway, even if you've been into work with them, you don't really know what they do.
Well, my dad was a steel engineer. I had no clue what that meant, and I'm fairly certain I didn't want to be it. You know, I was like, number one, I don't want to work in South Yorkshire, and number two, it doesn't sound very interesting. So I don't want to be a steel engineer. And my mum was a housewife; she didn't work, so I didn't have much exposure, certainly not in the 1980s, to anything other than housewives. Really, that's what women did.
Did you have a TV in the house?
Yeah, we did have a TV in the house, but it was largely commandeered again by my mother, and she used to like to watch her TV.
Yeah, so you weren't exactly watching loads of like kids programs with like, look at this person doing this interesting career or whatever.
Well, again, 1980s TV, I don't think there was that much of that around, really.
I'm just thinking of Fred Dibner, but I often do, so.
You're listening to Series 5, Episode 7, and to my guest, Rachel Surtees. This is another Zoom interview recorded on the 23rd of January 2024. Rachel Surtees originally trained as a holistic therapist, growing and evolving her practice from there. She has worked with people therapeutically for over 18 years now, including for the last 6 years, working psychotherapeutically as a relational integrative therapist. Through her work and experiences in her personal life, Rachel has become fascinated by people and the different ways we find of relating to each other. Rachel recognizes the power of having good, supportive relationships as being one of the central keys to us feeling success and happiness as individuals. Rachel has developed a deep interest in stories and the power they have to influence how we live our lives. She enjoys exploring with people the stories we create to help us make sense and meanings of our interactions with others in the world, and the things we experience in our lives that lead us to live out certain life narratives. Rachel finds deep joy in helping people transform their lives by supporting them to reimagine the stories they hold, which may be limiting them. Right, let's do this. Episode 117 of Working Hours with Rachel Surtees.
Okay, so we'll go straight into what is it that you're doing now then?
So I am a relational integrative psychotherapist these days. I have come to it by quite a circuitous route. So as I've already suggested, I grew up in a family that didn't have the greatest of aspirations for me. They were, if I'm very PC about it, a little dysfunctional as a family. And consequently, I left school having barely any GCSEs to rub together. I left home at 16 to live with my 24-year-old boyfriend, got pregnant, had a baby, and then went and worked in an office to pay the bills because you didn't need any qualifications to work in an office as an admin assistant. And there I stayed until I found out I was pregnant with my second child at the ripe old age of 25. And I was made redundant at the same time. So I found out I was 3 months pregnant and made redundant in the same week. So I covered somebody else's maternity leave for 6 months and then decided I'm just going to retrain and launch my own business. You know, why not? Why not give it a go? This working for other people business isn't really suiting me. There's not much in the way of career prospects when you're an admin assistant. No. So, you know, I might as well try doing something for myself. So I did retrain as a massage therapist.
So were you still pregnant at the time?
No, I waited until after I'd had my daughter.
Yeah.
And I think she was about 9 months old when I actually went into training. So it's basically coming to the end of what would have been my maternity leave if I had a job. But she was born in December and the training didn't start until the following September, basically. So yeah, I ended up retraining over the course of a year and then started my own business, and I have been self-employed ever since. I trained in many disciplines, so I would have described myself as a holistic therapist for a very long time. And somewhere along the route, I ended up being a director of a psychotherapy training institute for about 5 years as well. That was one of those weird turns of events and circumstances that led me to saying yes to an opportunity. I'd worked with a bunch of psychotherapists over the years and it just always fascinated me. So I decided eventually in 2017, I think it was, that I was going to start my own training. With psychotherapy training, after a certain amount of time, they assess you and allow you to work with the people if you're deemed to be fit to work with people. So I was seeing private clients alongside my holistic therapy. And then eventually COVID happened. And I was banned from touching people for a living for a substantial amount of time, which obviously as a self-employed person, when that's your main source of income, is a little perplexing. So I decided that I was going to rebrand and become just a psychotherapist at that point in time, because I had that available to me. That was always my plan eventually. But I think I had it was going to happen 5 or 6 years in the future beyond COVID.
Yeah.
So it fast forwarded quite significantly, and I became an online psychotherapist at that point in time. And then took my therapy into the outdoors as well. So now my business brand is the Rambling Psychotherapist. And I do face-to-face sessions in the outdoors, and I still work online. I offer people the option to work online as well.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot in that. My next question normally is how you got into it. You kind of covered the broad strokes, but I mean, so let's touch on the kind of setting up for yourself and the journey from, hands-on massage to, remote counselling. How did that? I mean, I suppose there's a level at which it's incremental, and I guess it's a sphere that you sort of circle in and that you got more and more drawn into, as you kind of said. Yeah, but like, how does that come about? Well, like, was it the clients that you were getting? Were you massaging a lot of therapists? Like, your job seems interesting. Or...
Well, I always quip a little bit that, like, I was a little shocked to find out as a massage therapist when I first launched my business, that people would take their clothes off, get on the couch, and start telling me everything about their lives, and I just didn't feel equipped to deal with it. But I found it fascinating. I was like, what on earth is going on here? People come to this place, and it's a phenomenon that happens with people like hairdressers, and there are various professions where people put themselves in a slightly vulnerable position and suddenly start to talk about things that they wouldn't talk to anybody else about ever. So this fascinated me, and I guess I just got interested in how you work with that. I got more and more interested in how people work, how they tick, and what makes people do these things, and consequently just started looking more and more into how to work with it myself. And like I say, it's wound up with me doing 4 years of training and 2 years of post-qualification study to become a therapist in the long run.
So, I mean, was the initial training when you did the initial massage course, was that quite difficult, or did you take that quite easily? Because you said you didn't really do uni or anything, so was your relationship with education always quite good, but it wasn't something that you wanted to continue on, or?
No, I would describe myself as not academic. I'm told that that's not true, but I would still describe myself as not academic. I guess I had a problematic relationship for me with education, in that it was too strict, too structured, not based around the things that I was really interested in. So I always thought that I wasn't really very capable, although I didn't particularly struggle massively.
Yeah.
I went a bit off-piste in my final year of my final GCSE year, but that was as a result of life events that were going on around me. I just got taken away by them rather than anything else. So, like I say, I didn't come out of school with massively brilliant grades.
But you weren't hating it either. You weren't.
No, I wasn't hating it. I quite liked learning.
Yeah.
I liked learning new things. I've always been fascinated by the world. Still am fascinated by the world. And I guess that's also fueled me continuing my progression as a therapist and becoming a psychotherapist. I just fascinated by the way things work, So I've got multiple interests ranging from crochet to quantum physics, I'm just fascinated by how things work. So I guess it was just a natural progression, really, that I would continue going down those lines and find my way into different little nooks and crannies that might be interesting, and psychotherapy was one of those.
So I don't get the impression you were kind of intimidated by any of it at any point, really. How was the making the jump into working for yourself? Did you take to that quite easily? Was that quite scary? Was that sort of...
Well, again, a lot of people look at me and go, oh my goodness, you must be so brave to work for yourself. And for me, it just felt like a really logical decision. I was working in admin. I'd sort of worked my way up to a reasonable level. I was getting paid a reasonable wage for an admin assistant. But I knew that if you took time out from doing admin, that you would end up at the bottom of the pile again, that you'd be starting from scratch, especially if you weren't going back into a job that, after maternity leave.
Yeah.
I was covering somebody else's maternity leave. There was no job for me to go back into. And I just thought, I'm going to end up working all hours God sends just to pay for my childcare. So I don't want to do that. The more sensible thing would be to do something that I think I will enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And try working for myself. So for me, again, it just felt really rational.
Yeah.
Was it a bit scary? Maybe it was a little bit intimidating because I didn't know what I was doing. But again, I'm a curious soul. So, you know, the bits that I didn't know about, I knew I would find out. I would find out the people who did know and you know, be able to get the information that I needed in order to be able to do it. So I guess I've just got to trust in myself as far as that's concerned. You know, I've got an ultimate trust that I will be able to work things out. So
people do this. I'm a person. I'll figure it out.
yeah. I remember one of the first, because when I first started my business in 2006, the internet wasn't that massive at that point in time. So it didn't really matter whether you had a website or not, because there weren't that many people using it.
This was before Facebook was even big, wasn't it? Like 2006.
Exactly. But I remember like it becoming more prevalent and me going, oh my goodness, I think I need a website. I haven't really got enough money to pay somebody to make me one, so I went and got a book from the library and learned how to code. You know, that just, again, I've got a bit of time in my hands. I can do that. I'm sure I'll work it out. It just seemed sensible. It just seemed like the rational thing to do. So, yeah. So no, I don't think I was massively intimidated by it. And yeah, I can sort of understand why some people might be, especially if they're giving up an income to make the leap to do it. But I wasn't. So
you become institutionalized as well. It's like when you're in a place for a long time, you just used to that, and you don't know what it's like out there. And especially if you've not looked for a job for a while, it's scary to have to do because it's hard work and it's demoralizing. And
there is that, yeah. There is that. I think I also held the opinion that I didn't make a particularly good employee either. I'm a little bit antisocial in my character. So if somebody was telling me to do something that didn't make an awful lot of sense to me, I would argue my case, you know, and I would say, this doesn't make sense to me. I think if we do it this way, it would be better. Or if I do it this way, it would be better. And I think I was just a bit of a pain in the bum to most of my managers, if I'm honest. So again, you know, it bodes well that I am my own boss. You know, the only person I'm a pain to now is me.
Yeah, because everyone else is paying you to be nice to them.
Exactly. I don't know. Some of my clients might actually disagree with you on that one. My God, she's actually quite challenging. She might be a little bit of a pain, but
yeah, you're just giving them what they need.
Exactly. I'm giving them what they pay me for. So people are paying me to be a pain. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, so I kind of want to ask a few more questions about it, but I think we'll go into my questions, and then like other stuff will come out as we chat.
Okay.
So I'll start us off with COVID. So what I'm looking at here is getting you to look back at the experience of going into lockdown and just thinking of that sort of initial sort of phase. Was that a big increase in work for you or a drop off in work for you? Because it seems to have been kind of one or the other. People didn't really stay neutral on that, unless they were just didn't even notice it. Their job didn't change through the whole thing. So yeah, whether you got busier or quieter and then sort of coming out of it, is there anything, have you changed the way that you work coming out of COVID? Are there any kind of permanent changes from that for you?
Yeah. So, yeah, definitely going into COVID, I saw a massive drop off. So even before lockdown was announced, the majority of my income stream was from massage, aromatherapy, reflexology, you know, hands-on physical therapies. So as reports of the virus rising were getting stronger and stronger, clients started cancelling. Because they didn't want to take the risk of coming in and being touched and so on and so forth. I hasten to add, legitimately touched. You know,
yeah,
it was part of my job.
Informed and consensual.
Yes, it was all consensual. I had their permission to do this, and it was all above board.
Yeah.
But yeah, people just didn't want to take the risk. So even before lockdown was announced, I think my income dropped by about a third in the month running up to lockdown. And then obviously lockdown was announced, and I just wasn't permitted to see anybody. We weren't permitted to work with people indoors, etc., etc., etc. And I think it was the August before they said we were allowed to go back to work.
Sounds about right.
So that was a long time. That was 5 months of no income really from that. I was self-employed, single parent. I needed to earn money, so I did have a small amount of psychotherapy clients as part of my work at that point in time. So I asked them if they would be willing to go online, and they were all very amenable, which was great. And I just decided that I would focus on building an online therapy client workload in order to try and make sure I got enough income coming through the door. And that's where I stayed. And it was really, really hard work, because you'd think, although everything was really, really stressful, and online therapy was very accessible, you'd think that it would mean that people would want it. But what I was discovering was that people are finding it impossible to find anywhere private in the house. Because everybody was at home. So people didn't want to do online therapy just in case they got overheard. So it was really tough, really, really tough.
A really interesting point, because it's like, what I've talked about obviously a lot on these interviews has been sort of the invasion of work into your home and into your domestic space. But the flip side of that being therapeutic and personal, mental health and so on, you need privacy for that. You need intimacy, you need safety.
Oh, absolutely.
And your family, like, as much as you love them, a lot of the time they're part of the problem.
Yeah.
you need that separation where you're like, they're making me pull my hair out.
Exactly.
But you don't want to tell that
freedom. You need that freedom to speak about anything you want to speak about without somebody overhearing and judging you. Or getting worried about what you're speaking about, or, whatever it might be, whatever response you might get. You just need that freedom and space. So yeah, it is one of the drawbacks of online therapy. Obviously, it means that you can have it whenever you want it, wherever you want it, and with whichever therapist you want it. So it's also convenient as well, as long as you've got the setup in your own space to be able to get that privacy that you need. And there are additional things that you can put in place. So things like I'll get clients putting music on in the hallway, so that actually it just disrupts your voice and so on. So even if people can hear that you're talking, they can't hear what you're saying, because actually the music's the more prominent noise and things like that. So there are strategies we can use. But yeah, it was just hard to build. During lockdown, because of that reason, people were really struggling to find the space to speak freely.
How the sort of outdoor sessions came about then? Was that the kind of...
Yeah, sort of. So I found myself, I told you I was a little antisocial in my character. So I was making my one walk a day the biggest mammoth walk I've ever had in my entire life, I think. Just kind of needing to set my head straight. So I was taking the dog out for a walk a day, but it was usually several hours long. And kind of mulling the problem over in my head. How do I get clients? How do I get clients? How do I get clients? And I've always been an outdoorsy girl. Always been an outdoorsy girl. And eventually, part of my plan was to take therapy into the outdoors. It's an actual thing. It's an actual concept. So it was part of my plan, again, somewhere in the distant future. I didn't quite know when. I had this idea that I needed to somehow be a bit more experienced or get a qualification or something along those lines in order to be able to do it. And I was wandering back down the street after one of these epic walks, and thinking to myself, well, I could just, in order to see people face to face, I could just go outside, because we're allowed to meet each other outside now. So I looked into it, and it actually wasn't as restrictive as I thought it was. As long as I got some good supervision and learnt how to contract properly and learnt how to actually work in the outdoors in terms of confidentiality and things like that, it was absolutely fine. So yeah, it was at that point. I think that was actually in the August that I went, well, apparently I'm now just going to be a psychotherapist. I'm going to totally rebrand. So my original business was called Apple Tree Holistic Therapies. And I rebranded as the Rambling Psychotherapist from that point forwards, and just started to build my practice face-to-face in the outdoors from there.
I mean, I guess you kind of answered the second part of that in terms of changes coming out of COVID. Like entire career change, business change, the way that you do your business has changed.
Exactly. Everything has changed.
I suppose, obviously you can only talk about this in the general sense, but I want to get you to speak to, because obviously through COVID, there was big focus of like a lot of the news and the sort of media that was about mental health, mental well-being, inclusion, and people being isolated, all that kind of stuff. And coming out of COVID, like again, on the podcast, I've discussed a lot of times, I feel like it's a door that we've closed. It's kind of like, well, COVID's done now. We don't talk about that. But I think that most people, it's a sort of scratch the surface, and there's a lot there to unpack, a lot to process, whether you had it or not, whether you know people who had the virus or not. That whole experience is still something that we think we've dealt with. But what I'm getting at, are you getting a lot of people who still talk about that time? Are you getting, I mean, you can't tell if you're getting more customers or not because of that, but just what are your reflections on that in terms of your work?
It's had a huge impact on the world in general. I don't know anybody who hasn't been impacted at all by it. And obviously there's a whole spectrum of impact, isn't there? So yes, the majority of my clients are still talking about the impact that has had on them, because it's reactivated things from their history. So it's caused additional re-traumatization for some people. For other people, it's made them really question themselves, and it's had such a significant impact moving forwards. I mean, I think about little things like I used to find it distressing going to the supermarket. So when we were all in face masks, I used to find it really distressing going to the supermarket, watching small children in trolleys. When they couldn't see the adults' faces, they just looked totally put down. They didn't know whether they were coming or going. They looked really distressed. A lot of them would be screaming, crying, etc., with no ability to be comforted by the parents. And if you look at things like there were some experiments, I can't remember when they were done. I'm not entirely sure that they were very ethical, if I'm wholeheartedly honest with you either, but they're called the still face experiments. And if you look at the impact that it has on a child when they can't read your expression, when your face stays still, it's really distressing for really small children to not be able to have that mouth and eyes read. That's going to have that alone is going to have a huge impact moving forwards. So, I mean, I find it a bit of a nonsense that we say COVID is done, because it's still around. The virus hasn't disappeared. We're still experiencing it. People are still getting really ill from it. People are still dying. Ultimately, it's not gone.
And people have got long-term illnesses coming out of it, and that's something that nope, we don't talk about that. We're not going to mention that. That doesn't exist. Nope.
And if you think about it, that dismisses the experience of anybody who has been impacted by it. So where do those people turn? Where is safe for those people to turn and actually speak about what's going on for them and help and support them to process it? So people are turning to therapy for such things. God, there's all sorts of impacts. But take somebody with attachment trauma, so somebody who's been insecurely attached in their family in early life, They found themselves as a single parent in adult life, and all of a sudden they can't have contact with the other people in the world out there that they know and love. That's re-traumatizing. That's huge. How many people must have been in that situation? I was.
Millions.
I was. Yeah. So, how many other people? And we're just being told, yeah, COVID's done now, move on. So it's unethical, I think, but I'm sure my voice won't get heard. As far as that's concerned.
But it's that whole ridiculous thing again. It's this whole sort of, how many times do you see this repeated? Like, I was only young during the initial sort of AIDS pandemic, and even watching COVID come in, it's always this, it doesn't exist. It's not real. You don't have it. You're just making a fuss. Like this bizarre attitude to illness that we all have to a degree. And it's like literally as we're seeing, and people forget as well, like the numbers of deaths and the numbers of like, literally loads of bodies and like digging pits, people because they couldn't bury enough people. And people worked through that.
Yeah.
And with that and around that. And like most of us were kind of like just watching red maps on the TV going, oh, they don't know what they're doing. Oh, bloody hell. How many times have we walked? And it's like at the same time, there's just horror going on.
Yeah. And I've had contact with NHS staff that have just been horrendously treated and actually come out the other side hugely traumatized. Like without prior trauma, this wasn't like re-traumatization. This is just their experience of working through that period has hugely traumatized them. There was the point where people were actually losing their jobs because they were refusing to get immunized. Wow. Okay. If that's not traumatic, your way of supporting yourself to live is threatened unless you compromise your values and go have an immunization that you don't actually believe is going to be safe for you. Wow. Yeah. It's huge. We could cover it in about 20 podcasts, perhaps, and then still only be scratching the surface, I guess.
Well, I've done 100, and I don't think we've touched on them yet. But yeah, and this is why I got to a period where it was kind of, oh, is it old hat now? Is it am I just kind of prodding people's wounds and stuff? But I think it's a worthwhile subject to keep on, and also, where else are you going to get to unless you go actively seek therapy or someone to talk to? Unless you're seeing someone like yourself, where does someone have space to talk about that generally?
Yeah,
and all your friends and family have said the same things before,
And if you're lucky, you have a network of people around you who are actually supportive of ongoing conversation around that. A lot of people who were heavily impacted by it don't want to talk about it. So that, COVID's done now is a really convenient way of shutting down a conversation as well, isn't it?
Right.
And again, it's because people potentially don't want to go near the impact for themselves as well. They don't want to be in contact with that because it's too distressing. It's like locking up all that distress and trauma in Pandora's box and hoping the lid doesn't blow off some point in the future,
Which, as you know, won't work.
Probably not. There'll be a trigger somewhere down the line and it will arrive again.
Yep, it will always come back. Okay, so I'm just thinking which way around we'll do it. Let's do Brexit next.
Okay.
So, I mean, this, it might not even factor in for you, but then it might be a big factor. I don't know. So again, the question is, has Brexit changed your work? So since we have Brexited, and bearing in mind this was through COVID times as well, so it kind of, you might not notice.
Yeah.
But as far as you can tell, has Brexit had any impact on your work? Has it changed anything about your work?
Not massively, to my knowledge. There have been some questions because I do work internationally. So there have been some questions about which clients I am allowed to see and which clients I aren't allowed to see now that we're no longer European. So from my point of view, the minor inconvenience has just been if I've been approached by an international client, I've had to check with my insurers every single time to see whether or not I'm actually permitted to work with a person in that country.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been a massive inconvenience to me. But again, what I have seen is the impact on the people that I'm working with. So it has been in the discourse. You know, I have been working with people that are not of English or UK heritage that live in this country, and working with the distress, working with people through their distress of not knowing what this means for them, and whether or not they might be able to stay in the country that they've lived for the last 30 years. You know, they've lived and worked and paid taxes in, not knowing whether or not they will actually be able to stay. And continue with this foundation that they've built for themselves. So has it had a direct impact on my business? For me, not really. It's been very minimal. But it's definitely floating through the work that I do.
Yeah. And I think it'll be it'll be one of those things that it's too early to tell kind of thing. Like those impacts will come out later.
Yeah.
I won't get lost down a rabbit hole of talking about Brexit thing. I'm going to move this straight onto social media. What I want to look at here is the amount of time that you spend on social media, and if you think that's worthwhile. Do you get the results you want out of your social media? Do you feel that there's a good connection between I do thing and post thing and I get so-and-so result and you get the result you want? Or is it just like, I have to post every day and I don't know what to post and it doesn't work anyway, but if I do it, I don't get anything?
Well, up until recently, it was definitely the latter. I was definitely going, I know I need to be posting. I know this is meant to be good for my business. I'm not entirely sure how I measure whether this is good for my business or not, because I don't seem to be getting any particular results. Everything's hit and miss. And I think I was trying to be, I don't know, somebody like Brené Brown that had like however many millions of followers, you know, and talking about things that I feel are important and giving my slant on them and so on and so forth. And I had fun writing. I enjoyed engaging with people in that way. It's something apparently that I'm good at, so I'm told. So, you know, I've learned that about myself. And I wasn't being particularly productive in terms of client acquisition. So I actually I hired somebody to whoop my ass into shape. It's a fabulous person who does social media marketing, and she runs a boot camp. And I did her 3-month boot camp, and she's set me on the straight and narrow. So
you can plug her if you want.
Okay. Okay. So the wonderful Claire Clifford of Sunshine, I'm going to get Sunshine, I can't say it, Sunshine Digital, I think she's called. It runs this excellent boot camp called Shine Online. Oh, it's amazing. So she absolutely whooped my ass in shape, set me on the straight and narrow. And now I post on average about 3 times a week. I spend way less time on social media. I spend way less time crafting my content. And it actually seems to be generating things these days. But I guess, like harking back to like one of our earlier questions, I didn't know what I was doing in terms of social media marketing. And I kind of looked out there to see what other people were doing and tried to copy and emulate it, and it wasn't really working for me. So I found somebody who did know what I should be doing and asked them. There you go. So again, yeah, it's back to that kind of like, if it's not working out for you, why don't you find somebody who does know what they're doing and ask them what to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, so from my perspective, social media is currently much more fulfilling than it ever was. And I'm not very techie, but I'm actually now going, oh, I might start doing reels. This is exciting. So I'm actually getting excited about doing it now as well.
Yeah, that's good.
So, yeah.
I mean, in and of itself, like there's loads of it that's great. I mean, like, you know, doing a bit of design and a bit of writing. It's all the bit where you have to think about it and target it and make it for other people. That's when it gets difficult. It's, if you're making it for yourself, that's fine. That's just fun.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm making it to get
like
results.
me.
Yeah.
People like me that like to think about things like I do. Yeah.
But you won't reach them because, you know, they're looking at everything else they're looking at all the stuff that you're looking at and maybe making similar things to you're making. It's like, yeah, it's that whole, it's getting the audience, isn't it? It's like, how do I get onto the right algorithm?
Well, it's just simple things like asking people to actually engage with me. I wasn't doing that. I wasn't actually asking people to engage with me. I was just putting my stuff out there and hoping people liked it, you know? It's just a little simple thing like you need to put a call for action at the end of your post. And it's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And not too many, not ask for all your asks in one post.
Yeah, exactly.
This and this and this and this. And this and this. No, I'm not even going to read all of those.
Yeah. Make it a thing that people actually want to do as well, you know?
So, I am going to do the climate change question. Is there anything that you can do in your work in terms of tackling climate change? So either through raising awareness, adaptation or mitigation?
Okay. So as part of my convoluted route through discovery and training and becoming a psychotherapist eventually, I actually trained as a shamanic practitioner as part of all of that. Now, a lot of people have no clue what that actually means. Shamanism is a form of spirituality which has the fact that we are animals as part of an ecosystem and that we should be behaving like animals that are interdependent on our ecosystem. At the heart of this form of spirituality, that is the belief at the heart of it all. So there's a concept in shamanism called right living. So living as much as you can in harmony with the world and the other beings that actually populate it as well as us. So from a shamanic perspective, one of the things that stops us from doing this is disconnection from self and therefore disconnection from the world as well. And in shamanism, it's classed as an illness. It's actually classed that disconnect from self and the world is an illness. So as part of my work as a therapist, I am reconnecting people with self. And obviously I'm doing a lot of it in the outdoors as well. So I'm reconnecting people with environment as well. And as I guess organically, my work does grow eco-consciousness, does grow people's desire to right live. So I feel like I'm inadvertently having an impact on the whole climate change thing, one person at a time. I do try and talk about this stuff through my social media as well. So I do try to awareness raise. I run workshops as well, which are about living in tune with the seasons. And I talk about my distress that actually the seasons are changing significantly and that nature's getting highly confused about, this weird weather that we're getting at freakishly different times of the year and so on and so forth. So I do raise an awful lot of awareness. In terms of what I do with my clients as well, I do encourage people to use public transport, etc. if they're coming to actually physically see me in a space. I try and make as few trips a day as possible because actually the place that I live and work in are not travelable to on public transport. But that is okay. I try and make as few trips a day as possible, so I try and group people together.
Yeah.
And just try and be conscious of my carbon footprint when it comes to the other aspects of my work as well. I believe that if I were to collaborate with others, we could have a larger impact. but the people that are wanting to do that, I guess, are wanting to collaborate with bigger people than I. So I've got that. I can't remember what the original proverb was, but it was about an old man walking along the seashore and finding a young boy throwing individual starfish back into the sea that had been stranded on the sand. And the old man turns to the boy and says, "You know, you can't save them all." And the young boy goes, "Yes, but I can save that one, and that one, and that one," you know? So from my perspective, you know, it might be a drop at a time, but I'm having an impact. And if further down the line I end up collaborating and my impact becomes larger, fantastic. But it's a bigger problem than just I.
So things like climate anxiety, climate grief, does that show up at all with any of your clients? Is that anything that comes up?
Yeah, it is. It's I wouldn't say it's massively strong in any of my individual clients as it stands at the moment. There is little bits of it around. So people hearkening back to different times and going, "Oh my gosh, isn't the world crazy now?" And doesn't this weather represent a lot of what is actually going on in the world as well? This crazy weather is like the crazy I don't know, political weather or the crazy commercial.
Almost like everything's heating up and getting faster.
Yeah. They all kind of like mirror each other almost, don't they? So that is definitely in the discourse with my clients. How but again, part of that is because when we're doing therapy, we use the environment in that way. So we use the environment to actually create metaphor around the person's experience as well. So I guess my clients are getting used to talking in that way and likening the two to each other. What I tend to find for most people is that there's just like an underlying sadness, an underlying melancholy that people can't quite, you know, it's not a huge distress to people massively, but there's an underlying sadness and an underlying melancholy and an underlying sense of despair. There's not much we can do about this. And again, that sense of like, what good is it me changing? I will, because it feels like I need to do something. I will make changes in my life because I feel I need to do something, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be impactful.
Yeah. But, well, yeah, I mean, it's like I will make changes, but nobody else around me will. So, and that will be hard. I mean, it's kind of like trying to, you know, it's like trying to give up being an alcoholic while working in a pub sort of thing. Yeah. Like, this is not the environment. Like, this is not really conducive to me doing what I want to do and make the changes that I want to change.
No, absolutely. And again, it's really similar to therapy itself. People will often come to me because they've got underlying issues in their familial relationships. And as they start to make changes in the way that they are in the world, they start to realise that the people around them are not willing to look at this stuff, not willing to take responsibility for their own behaviour, not willing to step up and apologise for things if they get things wrong, etc., etc. So they're faced with, I want something different, and the people around me don't. So what do I do? So it creates a dilemma for people. And again, that runs through their work life, their social justice life, their friendships, their families, that, you know, it just runs through all of their relationships.
I've been thinking of a thing recently. So separate from public health, you've got the kind of general public health. But then the way that people think about health, there's the sort of your bodily, physical health and your mental health now. People think more about mental health and so on. But there's very little in the realm. So there will be public health things, but there's very little social health. So there's no like, how much should you earn to be healthy? How many friends should you have to be healthy? What should those friendships be like? What should your familial relationships be like? What are the healthy examples and versions, and like, you know, and they can take all different forms, but there are equations in that you need at least this many people in your life to make you a healthy, fully rounded person. You need this much money, you know, depending on the kind of society that you live in and what sort of standard of living, but, you know, like your basic standard of living to cover those needs, and then a little bit more to make life worthwhile. But all of those sort of things. And I think that's something that will come up, that we will start to see more of, like, but there's so much in terms of the economy and the way that all the discussions work weighed against that. In the same way that, like, you must have seen in the US, they've tried a couple of times to get the gun violence and all the murders and all the, you know, your regular weekly shootings in schools or whatever as a public health concern. And the NRA is like, no, you can't do that. But it is, you know.
Well, I guess if you start to actually say, yes, this is a problem, then you have to acknowledge the depth and breadth of that problem. And well, yeah, the impetus then is that actually, you know, the onus is on you to do something about that. You know, if you're saying, yes, this is a problem, then there's some responsibility there, isn't there? So, yeah, the people that are in power, the people that could do something about this, are not wanting to tackle that, I don't think. They're just not wanting to tackle that. So they'll avoid it as long as they can, I suspect. There is a little bit of me sort of wants to throw them a bone, because it's a huge issue. How do you tackle that? How do you tackle that? Does any one person know? Would any working group of people know, you know? How do you tackle that? It's a common problem.
Well, I mean, we kind of do in a way. If you know, a lot of the health and social media in general, marketing, there is, and okay, it varies, but there is this through line of, like, this is what you should have. You know, there's this is what a successful life is. This is what a glamorous life is. This is what a normal life is. These are the sort of basic things that you can have. But it's one of those, it's that normal thing of everybody knows what normal is, but nobody thinks they're it.
Yeah.
And that whole thing of, like, oh yeah, that's what that looks like. And that's what I'm trying to look like. So I fit into this sort of thing. So I should look like that and be like this.
Yeah.
And then if I get more money, then I should look like that and be like that. But you can be the richest person in the world and have really dysfunctional, unhealthy relationships. And you can be the poorest person in the world and have really great, healthy relationships. And that will affect your health outcomes and your life outcomes and all of these different things. But we don't know what we don't know what all the variables of that are.
No, absolutely. And, like, ultimately, that's going to vary cross-culturally. You know, what is healthy for one culture is going to be very different in another. Even across different groups of people within the UK, people's choices about the way they live. You know, some people might choose to do community living, at which point it's a whole different set of parameters to people that want to live as a nuclear family, for example, you know? We can't put a hard and fast on it, I don't think. So I guess it's a little bit like when you decide new year, new me, and I want to be healthy, and you start looking at all the information out there about how to be healthy, how do you decide which bit's right for you, which bit's going to work for you, you know? It's trial and error, isn't it? It's actually informing yourself of what is available and deciding for yourself what might be right for you.
And your own biases as well of, like, oh, that's my style of health fitness and the body shape I think I should be, and that's... Yes. And this is one of the things, this one of my soapbox topics. I think we have been disempowered across the Western world. Generally, we've been told to hand our power over to experts that other people know better than we do. So we expect to be told what is right for us, rather than questioning for ourselves and actually really paying attention to our own inner knowing about what is right for us and making a decision based on information that's out there,
reasoned argument and what feels right for us. People tend not to do that anymore, generally, in my experience. It usually, when I suggest to people that they might want to start doing that, it usually comes to as a bit of a surprise to people that I might want them to. That I might, in my relationship with them, in my working relationship with them, I actually might want them to get in touch with their own agency and make decisions from their point of view. And, if it doesn't suit me, then we'll have a discussion about it.
Yeah. I mean, I was having a similar but flip side conversation this morning, in that there's a lot of these, in the same way that we've kind of been trained into playing to expectations, I guess is the best way of putting it. So this was a discussion about people sort of, where you go into groups and you go into meetings and people are like, oh, well, we're going to do this, that, and the other. We're going to ask you questions. And then, or they say they're involving you, they ask you questions and then they do nothing with it. Or they ask you questions and then they disapprove of the answers you give. And it's like, well, why have you asked this? Like, well, it's purely a formality so that we look good and we said we've done the thing
we can look like we're actually engaged.
We've done the thing we're supposed to, and now we're going to do the thing that we want to do.
And unfortunately, that is rife in far too many organisations and far too many public organisations, particularly. It is far too rife a phenomena. And again, we could get into an endless discussion about how we change that. I'm reading a fabulous feminist classic at the moment. It talks about it's actually not the important people, it's not the big people, it's not the influential people that create change in life. It's the small, insignificant people standing up and going, no, that's what creates change. And some people have different ideas about how that happens.
And the social pressures as well. Like again, through doing this, I've very much come to, I don't expect anything from the leadership, like on climate change, for example, ever. They will be trailing so far behind the rest of us forever. And we should just ignore them. Like all they're ever looking for is oxygen for their nonsense. Just turn it all off. Just get rid of it. We don't need to listen to them. They have nothing to offer. They literally have nothing to offer. All they want is stuff from you. Like they want your vote, they want your attention, and they have nothing in return. And it'll be people working together, and it will be peer pressure that changes society. It won't be from the top, and it won't even be from campaign groups at the bottom. It'll be people going, this is successful, this works, this is what I need to do, this is the community that we've built, this is the that we can do. It will be other people looking around and seeing that all of those things that we've been sold, all of them are failing on their own terms, and they'll look around at other people and people who are managing to get by. That's what they'll adopt. If you don't need it, let it go, like all of these things, we're so attached because of this, that, and the other. It's just ways of explaining the world. It's nonsense. It's like, it only means something. Well, it actually can feed you and clothe you and house you and let you live.
Yeah, and we're talking about something really powerful here, aren't we? We're talking about humans' need for stories in order to collaborate with each other. I don't know if you've read the book *Sapiens*. It's been out a number of years now, but the concept of it is that humans are as successful as they are because of the creation of fictive language. It's allowed us to collaborate in larger and larger numbers. I don't think people realise that what they're doing is subscribing to stories. They don't realise that they're hearing something, and what they're being told is an explanation from one or a number of people's vantage points about how they believe something is working. And that they have a choice about whether or not they subscribe to that story or not. And that there are alternative stories available as well. I don't think so many people are just unaware that is a thing in the world. I run workshops on the power of stories and why it's important to know your own story and how that interacts with other people's stories and so on and so forth. And one of the questions that I ask in those workshops is can anybody tell me here something that we all believe in, but that is actually a story? And people will usually say Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, and I'm like, well, I don't know about you, but I stopped believing in Santa a very long time ago. Yeah. And the Easter Bunny never really featured on my radar because we weren't allowed Easter eggs in my house. So, that was never on my radar. So, no, what do we all believe in that is actually a human construct? It's a story. And people kind of look around the room at each other. They're a bit flabbergasted. And I go, money? Money is a story? And you see people, the realization on people's faces, it's like, oh, God, yeah. It really is, isn't it? Money's a story. Oh, okay. So when you start to kind of question, like, what stories am I subscribing to, and what are the other stories out there, and is there something that fits me better? But you have to be able to, like, go inside yourself and go, what feels right for me? You have to learn to trust yourself on that stuff in order to work in that way. Otherwise, it's sometimes just easier to stick with what other people feed you.
Yeah, well, so there's a whole area of discussion in terms of the self. What is the self? How is the self constructed? Is there even a self?
And
that
who's
is
the self and who's observing the self?
Yeah, but it's also that thing of, how you act in different ways with different people, and how we all, to a degree, have these various different personality types at the same time, of like for different contexts and different things. I was going somewhere with this and then I got lost in my own flowery description. No, I've lost the point.
We were talking about stories and subscribing.
Oh yeah, with the self. Yeah, so it's that, going back to what you were saying about change and wanting to change and being able to change. There's resistance to it because that self within let's say a familial context, so a person within a family, there is expectations of who that person is and should be.
Absolutely.
Some of which they'll be happy with, that they've reinforced, that they've built, that they've created even. And some of it they won't feel too comfortable with, or it won't fit. And it's those things that they want to change necessarily that you feel most you can't change because that would upset other people.
Yeah, if you delve into the literature through and look at things like attachment literature and things along those lines, like the infant adapts to its environment and the demands of its environment. So in order to get the care it needs, the infant from birth to the age of about 2 adapts to what the parents need from them. So in my family of origin, I needed to be virtually invisible. So I learned to be invisible. I needed to not create I learned to not have any needs. Or if I had any needs, I had to satisfy them for myself. So you can see how I've learned to adapt and so on and so forth. Do I want to go through life just being hugely self-reliant and never self-contained, never reaching out to anybody else? No, it actually causes problems in my relationship. But my survival as an infant was contingent on me doing that. So when I chose to start changing that, I came up against the part of me that believes I will die if I change that. That's a life or death thing. And what you're talking about there is exactly that. There will be ways that people have adapted to live in their family of origin that they go, do you know what? I don't really like this about myself, or I don't want to be this way. I don't want to have to do this in relationship anymore. I want to change it. So not only will they come up against resistance from the people who asked them to adapt in that way in the first place, but they'll have a real inner resistance to it because it will feel life-threatening as well. So it's really difficult. It's really difficult to examine your stories and choose something different. anybody who does, I think, needs a medal. If I'm honest with you, I've got so much respect for anybody who chooses to do something different for themselves.
That's set me up on all sorts of different directions. I am not going to go off on a tangent there. I'm going to go on to the next question. So if there were any 3 things that you could change about your work, you can be realistic or you can be totally fantastic. So there's no budget constraints or anything. If you haven't got 3, that's fine. But yeah, if you could change any 3 things about your work, what might they be?
Oh my goodness. I would make my work available to people who really, really need it but can't afford it. Obviously, I have to earn an income, so that's not entirely possible for me, although I do my best. I do keep 2 low-cost spaces on my caseload at any given time. So I would change that. I would just make my work freely available to people who couldn't afford it. Because oftentimes they are the people who need it the most, but can't access the support that they need. I would change psychotherapy as a profession so that it's no longer a middle-class profession. You have to have resources to become a therapist. Private training. It's not usually offered through universities. It's through private institutions. If it is accredited by a university, the fees are absolutely exorbitant. It costs an absolute fortune. You have to have resources to train as a therapist. And it's something that I went into with resources, and then because of lockdown and a divorce and things like that, I struggled to complete. I got there, but I struggled to complete because of that. And it really made me aware how inaccessible it is as a profession. And the final thing that I would do, again, it's an accessibility thing. I think a bit playfully, I think a lot of people who write psychotherapy textbooks have worked really, really hard to get where they are, spent a lot of money to be where they are, and therefore write psychotherapy textbooks in a way that's really inaccessible. They use language that is just unnecessary. This stuff that we carry around as therapists, if the wider population could read that and understand it, it would be so beneficial for the world. So I would make it a mandate that all psychotherapy literature be easily readable by the general public. There you go.
So I'm thinking there of the kind of gatekeeping that you're mentioning, and like of the knowledge, but also of the kind of distribution of the knowledge and of the language through kind of pop psychotherapy and sort of analysis culture, therapy culture. I just want to get, like, you don't have to say the deepest thing ever, but just a kind of reflection on the sort of, how do you see, like, maybe the difference between what you see in what's out there and how people use it, and what's, the knowledge as you see it from inside, and from being trained and so on. Are they, because some things I think it's really useful to have those concepts out there, but people take these things on board and run with them, and it's just like a label or a brand or a word for them to use. And it's kind of like, okay, you can self-diagnose in some circumstances. You know what I'm getting at.
I do, yeah. So I guess knowledge is powerful, and you have to be careful about how you wield that power, don't you? How it's put out there and how it's used. So I guess safeguards may or may not be sensible. I'm not entirely sure. I think to have some sort of consideration for how this might be used and to be careful about how you put it out there is sensible. One of the things that I find deeply frustrating is positive psychology to some extent, or in many circles I find it deeply frustrating. It's not frustrating as a concept, but it's put out there in a way that suggests that everybody could and should be able to do this. So if you just think differently and if you're just positive, then actually your whole world will change. And that doesn't take into account that, that thing that I've just told you about attachment theory, that actually for some people, changing the way they think will feel life-threatening, and it will be like incredibly difficult for people to do. They'll find it very, very challenging. And that leaves people feeling ashamed of themselves because, you know, other people can do it, so why can't I? What is so deeply wrong with me that I can't make these changes? You know, is that why I struggle with these things in my relationships? Is that so? You know, the idea that we will put certain things out there without telling people this is going to be difficult to do, potentially for you. Just bear this in mind. This is not an easy fix. This is potentially going to be quite difficult for you to do. So, yeah, for me, the safeguard is not offering magic pills. So when things are put out there as this will fix your problem, and it's almost like a one-size-fits-all solution to everybody's problem. You know, there is no such thing, is there? There is no magic bullet. There is no magic pill. It's just not going to happen. There will be something out there that might be useful and supportive for you. There may be a number of things that work as a brilliant cocktail that are supportive for you in changing the way that you want to change. But when people put things out there in that this will fix you kind of way, that can be quite dangerous, I think. And that for me is the thing that needs safeguarding, gatekeeping.
Yeah. And I think there's that sort of people throwing labels and things around very easily. And it's like, but if you were doing this properly, like this would take several hours of discovery before someone just throws that label around if this was being done properly.
And even then it's a story.
Yeah.
It's one person's story of what your difficulties mean. So if you're talking psychological diagnosis, it's one clinician's story of what your struggles mean. It's a word to describe your particular struggles based on one person's experience. If you went to a different clinician, they might give you a different diagnosis. You know, you have to recognise that as well, don't you? So yes, there's loads of information out there, and yes, you can self-identify with certain things. But again, for me, the recognition that it's a story is really important. It's like this is not an absolute objective truth. This is what sense I am making of my experience. So a prime example is myself. I've delved into neurodiversity over recent years, in part because I've got 2 neurodiverse children, and in part because I've got a bunch of clients coming through the door that are neurodiverse that have had actual diagnoses. And I've started to recognise, oh, hang on a second, some of this might fit me. So I suspect if I eventually get sat in front of a clinician, I've put in my application. It may be a while before I get there, but I suspect I will come out of it with an ADHD diagnosis. What does that mean to me? You know, why is that significant for me? Well, what it does is it gives me a shared language that other people might understand, and may mean that I can access some much needed support for myself. Does ADHD define me as a person? No. Does the diagnosis allow me to accept certain parts of my character that I don't particularly like? Yeah, actually it does. It makes me realise that I'm not as in control of that as I thought I could and should be. So it's got pros and cons being able to label yourself in that way. And again, I'm self-diagnosing there. I'm seeking an official diagnosis, but at the moment I'm self-diagnosing, self-labeling, because it's supportive of me to look for strategies to support myself with that. Some people wouldn't use it in that way. It might not be that beneficial to them.
I think that's going back to the stories that they're telling themselves. I think if you listen to what it's telling you, kind of thing, like, you know, you said because I was going to ask about neurodiversity. Like, I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, and I possibly ADHD. Something so other people have said I'm spectrumy. And at some point I'll investigate it or whatever. But like you say, it's that how you manage things for yourself. And I remember getting the dyslexic diagnosis, and it was it was a relief, but I was also like, I could see how I could use it for a lot of excuses. And I didn't want to do that. And but I think a lot of people are resistant to these things because they don't want the labels. It's like, I've heard of, like, I know people who work in education who've talked about dealing with children who are autistic and their parents are clearly autistic. They've never been diagnosed because they're older, and so they've never had that diagnosis. And they won't have it that their kid's autistic because I'm fine and they're just like me. It's like, you're autistic too. You just haven't been diagnosed.
You are a neurosparkly family. Yeah.
And it does seem to be very, like, within the family. It's like, oh, so-and-so got a diagnosis. And then it's like, oh, well, they're all very similar, these family members. I wonder if, they are. It's, and yeah, it's but I don't think
you're attached to it still, hasn't it?
Yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily harmful if it opens the doors to, like, okay, these are things that are common and typical within this diagnosis. If any of these feel familiar, and if any of them are like useful ways of managing this, I think that can only be a good thing. The only thing to be afraid of is the label, isn't it?
Well,
really.
So if you seek an official label, and you're making yourself a little vulnerable. Because there will be certain people and certain institutions and organisations that will discriminate against you because of that label. There will be certain institutions, organisations that will also support you with that label as well. So, if you're looking, ADHD being a prime example, for medication, you have to have a diagnosis. You can't access the medication without it. Ultimately, the medication is Class A drugs. They're not going to give you it unless you've had a diagnosis. So it opens the door to the support that you may want and need. For me, I'm not seeking an official diagnosis because I want medicating, because I feel like I can manage in the way that I'm doing, and having researched more strategies for dealing with some of the quirks that I have that I believe are ADHD. I've put things in place that support me with my life. But there are things that I struggle with, like organising myself, setting dates, and actually managing to put things in my calendar in a way that is manageable. Is something that I really, really struggle with. So I could do with some support from somebody to help me with that. Well, I can put in an application for an Access to Work grant to support me with that if I have a diagnosis. So again, it's that's not entirely true, actually. You don't actually have to have a diagnosis for the Access to Work.
But the point still stands.
But it helps. If you can go in and say, I have an ADHD diagnosis and this is one of my problems, then there's less argument about actually whether or not you're entitled to the grant in the first place. So it does open up doorways, and it also closes some as well. So again, if you want to self-diagnose, fine. Is that supportive of you? Is that helpful for you? How does it support you in your relationships? How does it support you in your work? How does it support you to seek things that will help you with your struggles? How does it support you generally? And do you need to seek? Is there a reason for you to seek an official diagnosis? For some people, they just want a big enough authority to tell them actually they're not flawed.
Or that they are.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, there is something wrong with it.
Yeah, well, it depends, doesn't it, on how you see diagnosis. Is it an explanation of your particular struggles, or is it somebody telling you there's something wrong with you? And again, it depends on how you view diagnosis. If we look at it through a medical model, you get a diagnosis of a serious illness, and that's quite devastating, isn't it? There is something wrong with you, and the repercussions of that can be really quite significant. But actually mental health problems, things like neurodiversity, dependent on where you are on the spectrum in it all. Does that mean there's actually something wrong with you? Possibly not.
Well, but then at the same time, you know, as if all our brains would be made the same, you know, our faces are, why would our brains be made all the same?
I remember one of my supervisors saying it's like deer. You know, there will be some deer that are really bold and get out there early in the morning. As soon as the light gets up, the sun hits that glade in the forest, they're out there getting the best grass. Those deer will always get the best grass. The more cautious deer may live longer. So they might not get the best grass. They might not have the best nutrition. The more cautious deer might, you know, fall back and not eat quite as much because the other deer eat more. But they also won't be hunted by predators in the same way. They won't fall foul of predators in the same way. So it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? You know, I think fast and I'm great in a crisis. Yeah, other people aren't. But I'm really rubbish at scheduling things. And usually 5 minutes before I should have left the house, 5 minutes after I should have left the house, I'm putting the tumble dryer on or something along those lines because actually I struggle with time blindness, you know?
Do you do the thing where you know you should be leaving the house?
Yeah.
And you're trying to leave on time, but then you just have to do 7 other jobs before you do actually?
Absolutely. Yeah. I cannot leave without doing these things first because currently right now, this is where my attention is. So although in the back of my head, there's this alarm going off that's going, leave now, leave now. I can't pay attention to that because this other alarm is louder. This other alarm that says that washing's going to go smelly is louder than me leaving the house. So, you know, I'm quite often a little bit late or get to places but by the skin of my teeth. I turned up to the park this morning to work with a client and was chuckling at the the differences in how we both arrive. That person arrives 10 minutes early and is usually sat or stood fully suited in waterproofs, big boots and a hat and gloves and waiting and checking their watch, waiting for me to arrive as I screeched into the car park and slammed the handbrake on and roll out of the car, putting my jacket on, you know? And it's like, well, that's just who I am. That is who I am. Yeah. It seems that no matter how hard I try to change that, it's not going to change. So do I accept that about myself and feature that into my working life and accommodate for that? Well, yeah, I do. And the language of ADHD has supported me to realise that actually that's not something wrong with me. It's just the way my brain works. It's not that that's wrong. It's just that, like, it doesn't fit in this neurotypical world. Doesn't adhere to the structures that are in place that other people want me to adhere to. But if I tell people I can't adhere to those structures and this will happen and that will happen, the other will happen, but actually I'll make sure I make good on time and things like that, then it's accommodated for in my work. Again, another really good reason to be self-employed.
Okay, so I'm going to do the UBI question. So I'm guessing you're familiar with Universal Basic Income. You know what it is, yeah. So if there was a UBI, how do you think that would affect your work? And so I'm going to do it old school. So thinking retroactively here. So not that it's just been brought in. There's always been a UBI. How do you think that might affect your work and career? Do you think you would have started the business, or would you just been like, well, I've got 2 kids, I've got plenty on my plate here?
I think I would have still started the business, if I'm honest with you. I was really starting to recognise, I know I was only 25, but I was really starting to recognise that I didn't fit easily into organisational structures. I had ideas that were different to other people's, and I had different ways of working to how our organisations wanted me to work. I was highly effective at what I did, but I didn't do it in the way that people wanted me to do it, and found myself frustrated with the rigidity of their but yeah, their indignation and their determination that I conform to their structures. I was, I would find myself puzzled and going, I'm doing the job really well, much better than some of the other people around me. I'm doing the job really well. I'm serving the organisation really well, and yet you're still telling me I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I would still have branched out by myself. It might not have been as easy to do, or as logical a step for me. I was going from having absolutely zero income and facing having a very low income. Should I go back into the workplace, to contemplating the idea that I might be able to build something that was much more fulfilling for me and fitted around my family. So it gave me a lot more freedom as well. If the income part of that had been met by working for somebody else, there's a lot appealing about working for other people, isn't there? You get sick pay, you get holiday pay, you get pensions, you get determined working hours. You don't have to expenses. You don't have to answer emails outside of working hours. You don't have to be worried about where the next client's coming from. You don't have to that work just arrives and you do it. So there's quite a lot of glamour in that, and I would still have been attracted to doing things for myself, doing things my own way, and following the things that I was interested in. I might have had it as a side hustle.
Yeah, maybe. But I think, the fact that you went on the journey, from your massage table to your therapy couch, or to the park bench.
Yeah, the park bench it is now. Yeah.
So, I think that was probably always going to be there, because your interest was there, and you're like to keep learning, to keep digging, essentially.
Yeah, it's been there from a really, really young age. I remember doing my dad's head in when we used to go out for walks. Like, what's that flower? What's this? What's that? Tell me what this is. How does that work? That has always been a part of my character. And I got the bit between my teeth when I was about 13, when it came to supporting people with their physical health, at least. And followed that path throughout, which is why at the age of 25, this is just the most sensible thing for me to do. Because this is ultimately much more rewarding and much more interesting than being an admin assistant. Not that there's anything wrong with being an admin assistant, I just didn't find it very interesting.
Well, there's that wrong with it. It's quite boring.
I really do think it depends on who you're working for and what the subject of the admin is, and things like that. If I'm honest with you,
what random task you've been given?
Yeah. And do you have any agency in the way that you do it?
And it's like sometimes with some of those roles, like when you get something where someone at a higher grade's done a thing and they're like, can you do something with this? And you're kind of like, I wish you'd just sent me all of it to begin with and I would have done the whole thing, because what you've done is just, what is this?
Yeah. And actually, you haven't given me the rest of it. So how is the bit that I do supposed to slot in with your bit? And I have no idea what the picture is. So,
the real answer is no, but I will say yes.
Yeah. I will say yes, because that's what's expected of me. Yes.
So that's my questions done. This is the part where I kind of throw it open to you. Like I said, I've probably got loads of other questions, but I should have probably been making notes through this, and I generally don't tend to. But yeah, I think we've got some good stuff there. It's very comprehensive, so we cover a lot of ground. But if there is anything that we haven't covered, or anything that you want to talk about or ask me or whatever, anything that you want to say or promote, this is the part of the show for you to do that.
And this is the part where I go blank.
Well, if you haven't got anything in particular, you can just give us the socials and where do people find you?
So you can find me on Facebook and Insta as The Rambling Psychotherapist. I'm on LinkedIn as Rachel Surtees. And my website is so my website is ramblingpsychotherapist.co.uk. Yeah, I think they are all the places you can find me.
Thank you again to Rachel for being my guest. You can keep up with Rachel and find out more at facebook.com/therapy in Leeds or instagram.com/the_rambling_psychotherapist. Or you can check her out on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Rachel-Surtees. Thanks as always to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. If you are in Leeds or from Leeds, if you are Leeds, then please be the guest on this show. Yes, I am speaking to you. I still need to find 883 loiners to interview, so being a guest is the greatest help. You'll get free advertising and media experience, and you'll be part of a unique project in our unique city. Whatever you do, I'm interested to hear about it. You don't have to be online, and you can even be anonymous if you would like. You will enjoy it. You can email Working Hours at workinghourspod@westernstudios.com. Okay, that's me. Work for peace and plan with kindness. Cheers, ears. Take care out there and be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes, which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Follow Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/western_studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/western-studios. Western Studios Leeds will help you realise your podcast for only £25 for an hour of podcast work. Need podcast production, recording, editing, or any podcast admin doing? Need it all doing? Do you want or need a podcast host or co-host for your podcast project? Then get in touch with Western Studios Leeds Limited. Email makemypodcast@western-studios.com to get your podcast made. I am available to third sector organisations, small to medium-sized businesses and individuals who want to make podcasts or create other digital audio content. Want to make some fundraising case studies? Want to show off your expertise in your field? Want some help creating your show and format, or just some support learning to podcast and getting going? Whatever your podcast needs, get in touch with Western Studios Leeds. Go to western-studios.com and use the contact page to drop me a message about either Working Hours or about your own podcast project.